Hey Dunchbags, what's going on? It's Landon Remixes here, and welcome to my review of the first ever studio EP from the electronic music band Breathe Carolina. This one is called Sleepless. To explain Breathe Carolina's career in the simplest way possible, just try to think of Cash Cash. They're both bands that in their earliest incarnations had a lot of influence from electronic music but weren't full-on EDM, but then later hit it lucky by finding a niche in the EDM scene. Except for Breathe Carolina, I feel like their transition was a lot less spontaneous, mainly because a lot of their earlier singles like Blackout had a lot of heavy electro house influence already. Their transition into a full-on EDM act wasn't necessarily surprising, but either way it managed to catch me off guard when I saw Breathe Carolina releasing on Spinnin Records in 2015 after not really hearing much from them in a 4-year period between Hell Is What You Make It and this EP. I also had an album called Savages, but I kind of ignored that one a little bit. I originally got introduced to Breathe Carolina through the Punk Goes Pop series, a series where they have punk artists go in and cover pop songs. It's pretty self-explanatory. Blackout was actually one of my absolute favorite songs back when I was first getting into punk music, and honestly that song is probably one of the reasons that I got into electronic music in the first place. I've got to say, initially I was very impressed with a lot of the material that Breathe Carolina was putting out, especially their collaboration with Y&V called Hero or Satellite. That one was on Oxygen, which is a sub-label of Spinnin Records, but it seems like most of their singles after this one were released on Spinnin's main label, along with enhanced music. But I've got to say, they've been across the board. They've been on Armada, Maximize. They also released the single Ruins on Doran Records, which is one of my favorite sub-labels of Spinnin. And for some reason I saw Breathe Carolina releasing a lot of singles and kind of didn't expect them to put out a full project, and I really don't think that they needed to. Mostly because I don't think that the Sleepless EP is anything really that special. I've got to say, one of the coolest things about this EP is seeing Breathe Carolina doing vocals again. Because in a lot of their early straight EDM songs, it didn't really feature much of their own original vocals. They had a lot of different guests, which of course, a good chunk of guests come back on this EP, but at least they're doing a good chunk on their own. I think the biggest one to take note of on this EP is the returning vocalist Haylene. I've been one to compliment Haylene's vocals a lot in the past, especially on her track Search and Rescue with Project 46 from their debut album, as well as the one she did with Bass Nectar on his last album. I think in general her material with Breathe Carolina has been pretty quality as well. I really liked Stars and Moon, the single that they did with her and Shanahan. Sadly, her appearance on this EP is one of the only ones that I actually liked. Honestly, the general setup of this EP is pretty messy. Extended mixes of Big Room House. I wish there was a lot I could say about this EP, and I wish I could praise it more than I am, but there's really just not much to take away here. Although I do have to say the appearance of More Than Ever on this one, which was one of their bigger Spinnin Records singles, is actually pretty refreshing. I just wish they would have cut it back to the radio edit, because extended mixes always sound really odd in an album format. I hate that so much. There is some decent to good content on here. Like I mentioned, there's the track with Haylene and Jay Cosmic, See the Sky. It's always cool for one to see Jay Cosmic doing liquid dubstep, considering he's primarily a hardstyle producer nowadays. And for two, we've got the singer from Breathe Carolina, David Smith, actually doing a duet with Haylene on this one, which is super cool. I wish I could praise his vocals in a lot of other places, but honestly the only one I'm really digging other than that small appearance is his vocals on the first track of the album, Nights, which is arguably my favorite on the entire EP. One thing I'm kind of confused with regarding this track is why it's called Nights and not Sleepless, considering there's a lyric in it that actually says Sleepless, and then the EP's closer, Sleepless, with Riggy and Pyros, is an instrumental that doesn't say Sleepless at all. Maybe they just didn't have a name for it and were like, hey, we should name the track that we called Sleepless Nights because it also says Nights and we don't really have a name for this track, so yay. Kind of confusing? Oh well, doesn't really matter, I guess. This track is especially cool to me because it was co-produced by Inukshuk, who I've actually done promotion for on Your EDM, so it's really rad to see his career come full circle with such a huge release as this one. There's also a handful of other co-producers on this thing, primarily Crossnaders, but also including Rios and Rees. I can't honestly say I liked either of the Crossnaders collaborations, the first of which is Stable, which is arguably the worst track on this entire EP. And don't get me wrong, you can't really blame Crossnaders for why this song sounds so bad, because the production for the most part is pretty decent. It's the vocals on this thing that are absolutely killing me. The lyrics are completely bland, they don't even really have a good rhyme scheme to them. And then in regards to the vocals' overall sound on this one, it just sounds like the emotion has been completely stripped and drained of this thing. I can't hear any kind of feeling in this one. It just sounds so dry. Such a rapid transition from Nights, which I felt like had a lot of emotion packed into it. This one is just bad. When I heard Vanish for the first time, I actually kind of liked it, but then after a few listens I started thinking, you know, I feel like I heard this song somewhere before. Ding ding ding, production-wise, it's practically the same exact song as Haywire's Endlessly off his Twofold Part 2 album that I reviewed earlier this year. I think a big problem with this EP is its general setup. In a lot of albums, I either really like the sound they're going for, or I really don't like it, and this one is very polarizing on opposite ends. I either hate the songs in this, or I love it. There's not a lot of middle ground where I said, oh, you know, this is a pretty neutral feel to me. The only song really even close on this aspect is the track Stay, which of course I wouldn't really call one of my favorites, but I definitely didn't hate it either, like I did a lot of the tracks on this thing. Getaway Car on this EP is especially cool, but probably mostly because Reese did the co-production on this one, and I typically know them as a progressive house project, so coming back onto this track making future bass was interesting, to say the least. I thought the production was a little bit amateur, but that's kind of where you can expect with a duo that did electro-pop combining with a progressive house duo. I probably should mention that Breathe Carolina was a duo when I first started listening to them. They no longer are a duo, they are a trio at this point, which means that in some cases there are actually 5 producers on these tracks, which is just absolutely insane considering the quality of this thing is so minimal. I've got to say, with a returning EP from Breathe Carolina, it's expected that they would have done some originals, avoided most collaborations, and kind of put out their own material showing that they've actually progressed a lot as artists since their punk music, but they don't really do that with this EP. They just collaborate with a lot of different co-producers and vocalists, most of whom seem to be taking the lead on these tracks. I'm not too terribly impressed with this thing. I didn't think it was terrible, but it definitely was far from great. I'm gonna give the Sleepless EP a strong 3.5 to a light 4. If you guys haven't listened to this one yet, as always, I have the Spotify link in the description so you can go check it out for yourself. Definitely check out Nights and see this guy, because Breathe Carolina's melodic dubstep on this EP is actually pretty solid. Anyway, I'm Landon Remixes, I'm basically Sleepless, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.